Sarianides, and as always, I'm joined by my partner, WEEI's John Lyons. Paul Varzella is scheduled to join us here momentarily, and tonight, or at least for the next half hour, we're going to recap night two of the NFL draft for the New England Patriots. And John, let's just jump right into it. Obviously, interesting beginning to the night. Patriots at pick 38 in the second round take Ohio State running back Travion Henderson. Not a pick that a lot of people saw coming, John. I mean, I think we knew running back was a potential need for them, but I didn't think they would address it in the second round. Part of me thought if a player like Henderson maybe was sitting there early third at 69, if he had fallen, perhaps they would have taken him there, but I didn't think they'd go running back in the second round. Just some initial thoughts on that and them going with Travion Henderson at pick 38 in the second round.
Yeah, and John, there was really a theme of the night for me for the Patriots, and it was explosiveness, right? Whether it was Henderson, Kyle Williams, even Jared Wilson, if you can never count a center as explosive, right? I know you're an O-line guy, kind of an oxymoron, but I mean, for a center, really good athlete. So that seemed like a theme of the night. And Travion Henderson, look, I'm a big Dylan Sampson guy. I was hoping he'd be the pick later on. He's another explosive back, but they view Henderson as a guy who just was a major piece of Ohio State winning a national championship. He had that 75-yard catch and run touchdown against Texas. This is a really explosive player. 1,000 rushing yards, 281 receiving yards as well. And I think another piece of this, and it's not the be-all, end-all, but it's important, arguably the best pass blocking running back in the draft. And I think when you look at a guy who can you play him on all three downs? Like, look, he's not going to be a great in between the tackles runner, I don't think, at least initially. But because of the pass blocking ability combined with the receiving ability, combined with the outside speed, you can play him on multiple downs. He won't just be a third down back. And I think that's why they target him. And let's be clear, with him and with Kyle Williams, these are guys they targeted. This was not, hey, the board fell this way. There were other running backs available at 38. There were other receivers available in the late second, early third round. The Patriots could have either traded up for or selected at 69. They targeted these two guys. So let's be clear, but this isn't just the board fell this way. These are targets, and they obviously believe Henderson is going to be an explosive piece of their offense going forward.
Paul, just some thoughts on Travion Henderson in round two. Surprised? Not surprised? What'd you think of the pick?
Shocked. I mean, this guy, I didn't have him on my radar at all for the Patriots, but he is a home run hitter. He adds an element of explosion to the Patriots offense that has been absent for some time now. So I can't say I was expecting that at all. But when you look at the board, it was him, it was Luther Burden, but with the character concerns there, he might have not even been on the Patriots' big board. He might have been completely wiped off their board. And then you look at Ezeraku, who I wanted them to pick the whole time. But obviously they thought they needed to help out Drake May more than they needed to help out the defense, especially after the free agency signings they had. So Henderson was a great addition to the offense, I think, and is going to add some stellar playmaking ability to the Patriots.
Yeah, he's going to give them something they haven't had at the running back position in a long time, and that's a breakaway threat. He's going to give them a big play threat. I think the other thing is this was a Josh McDaniels pick all day. I don't care what anybody says. It wasn't talked about tonight. Elliot Wolf met with the assembled media after the third round. It wasn't asked whether or not McDaniels influenced this pick, but when you look at his track record, when you look at the way that the Patriots use running backs during Josh McDaniels' time here previously as offensive coordinator, Travion Henderson fits that to a T. So there's no doubt in my mind that Josh McDaniels played a part in them drafting Travion Henderson. And look, I saw a lot of people complaining online that, that this isn't a need. Why would they take a running back? A playmaker's a playmaker. It doesn't have to be a need. And let's not forget, Elliot Wolf told us a few short weeks ago that at some point in the draft, it's going to be about taking the best player available. And I asked Elliot that tonight. I said, is this a case of you guys drafting the best player available? You mentioned a few weeks back that would be your strategy at points in this draft. Is this an example of that? And he said, yes, absolutely. So they're sitting there at 38. Let's not forget, a lot of people thought Travion Henderson perhaps could have been a first-round pick. I didn't think he was going to be a first-round pick. I thought that this was probably his sweet spot where he went, but a lot of people thought he could sneak in between 25 and 32. So I think they get tremendous value here. You get a back that's explosive, that can break chunk runs. You get a back who's terrific in pass pro, and above all else, he is the best receiving back in this draft. He's a guy that you can line up in the slot. You can motion him out of the backfield. He can run a full receiver route tree. I mean, you're getting a ton of value here from a playmaking standpoint. So the way I see it, you can't look at this as a need pick. You have to look at this as they added a guy who can be a difference maker. Wolf talked about it tonight. He can play all three downs. I think he's going to be a great fit in what McDaniels is looking to do offensively. And let's not forget one other part here. Mike Vrabel wants to be physical. He wants to run the football, and he wants to develop a physical identity. He now has three backs that he can do that with. And I think Henderson is going to play more snaps than people think. So I really like this pick. I think from a value standpoint, it's a terrific pick. I think it gives them another playmaker, something they lacked. And I think to a degree now, what you're going to see is a more diverse passing game, a more diverse attack. So I think a guy like him is going to be better used in this system than he would have been last year.
Yeah, and this isn't the first time they've tried, right? They drafted Pierre Strong a few years ago, really good athlete to be that guy. Even the Antonio Gibson signing, that was meant to be a more explosive thing. And he had a good year, but I wouldn't necessarily qualify him as this huge explosive threat. But it's like, this is something the Patriots have tried to do. And John, you mentioned like, okay, best player available versus need. Like, this was kind of a need too. And it wasn't a need on the level of offensive tackle or receiver or even maybe deep safety, depending on how you feel about Marte Mapu. But I mean, Antonio Gibson might not be here after next year. Even Ramondre Stevenson, there's an out in that contract after 2 years, and he lost 7 fumbles last year.
Yes.
So, like,
people aren't talking about that, John. So I'm glad you brought it up.
Yeah, and TreVeyon Henderson, I don't know if it's a coincidence. They drafted a guy that didn't fumble at all at Ohio State.
Yeah, in 4 years, he never fumbled the ball.
Right. So, look, I think he's going to be a guy. I think year one is kind of part of that rotation. And I agree with you. I think he might get more snaps than people think, but still, I wouldn't say he's going to get the majority of the snaps. But by 2026, he could be, I don't know if he's going to be a true number one back, but if he's a 1A or a close rotational 2, I could definitely see that by either the end of next season or by 2026.
And you see that more and more often in the NFL now, running back by committee. The Lyons a couple of years ago when they drafted Jahmyr Gibbs, everyone was super confused why they did that. And look what it did for their offense. It only helps to have weapons. It's a good problem to have. You'd rather have more than less. And I think the Patriots are now finding themselves in a good problem. And with McDaniels, we know he can get creative with how he uses weapons. So we'll see Henderson used in a multitude of ways. And again, we have more weapons. And for the first time in a while, a solid option out of the backfield where hopefully you can feel comfortable with him back there and be encouraged by how he's playing.
Yeah, and I think the Jahmyr Gibbs point that you made, Paul, I think is a terrific point as well, because there were a lot of people that questioned what was Brad Holmes doing, taking him 12th overall a couple of years ago. Well, we've seen he has paid big-time dividends, and old friend Todd McShay compared TreVeyon Henderson to Jahmyr Gibbs. So I don't think he's the athlete Jahmyr Gibbs is, but there's no question he gives this offense some juice out of the backfield, both as a runner and as a receiver. Biggest concern for me with him is he's got to stay healthy. He missed games in 2022, 2023. He also has a sleep disorder. I don't know how much that's going to factor into anything, but the bottom line is I think he's a terrific value pick there. And again, playmakers come in different shapes and sizes. At the end of the day, your playmakers don't just have to be receivers. They can be tight ends. They can be running backs. Patriots, I think, are going to get a lot out of this TreVeyon Henderson pick. Now, in the third round, pick 69, everybody was clamoring for a receiver. They finally took a receiver, Kyle Williams out of Washington State. Of course, Williams had been on a top 30 visit with the Patriots. He started his college career at UNLV before transferring to Washington State the last 2 years. Over the course of the last 2 years, he caught 61 passes and 70 passes. He also averaged over 16 yards a catch on perimeter screens. He's a big play receiver who can win versus man coverage. I love him in terms of his releases. I think he's the best release receiver in this draft. I will say this, though, and I want to get your thoughts on it. I don't love this pick, though. but I'm going to get your thoughts on it first, and then I'm going to tell you why I don't love it. It's not necessarily the player, but I'm not as in love with this pick as other people are.
So for me, it's funny you brought up his releases at the line. That was one of the first kind of points I noticed as well. And this is another one, right? They could have traded up late in the second round to get Trey Harris, and they chose not to. Isaac Tesla went right after Kyle Williams, one pick later. Like, this is a guy, just so we're clear going forward, like, they targeted him. They think he's going to be good. I like him a lot. Obviously, look, I like Trey Harris better. I know it would have taken a trade up to do. He can play X. I don't know if he's a true X, like say a Harris or like a Jaden Higgins would have been if they drafted him earlier. So I think he's more of a long-term ZF, maybe Z guy, which still again valuable, but we're still kind of waiting on that true X. And maybe I'll be wrong, and he can play X. I mean, he is 6 feet. Well, he's 5'11" and a half, whatever, just under 6 feet, 190. I mean, I would like my X receiver to be 6'2" and above and 200 pounds. So he's a little thin for that. He's done it. So there's a lot to like there. I just positionally, I still think they're missing that X. But this is an explosive player that I think can make a big difference. And this is not and John, I don't know if you're going to say this, it's not Tyquan Thornton a few years ago. Like I know he's a thinner guy, and I know he's a speed guy, so people are going to instantly connect that. It's not Tyquan Thornton a few years ago. I think he's much better than that.
I really like the pick, and he was at the Senior Bowl and kind of flew under the radar down there because of how good the talent was at the wide receiver position in Mobile. And then I look up his scouting reports. I see he's getting mocked to like the 4th round, maybe 3rd round. And I go and watch his film, and I was like, this guy's a borderline round 2 pick. I was super impressed with his film. The versatility is there on the outside and the inside. I think he's a field stretcher, and he's got a really good route tree. He's physical. He can be a jump ball guy. And along with that, he's a willing blocker. So when I look at wide receivers, just because I'm a lineman, so I have a bias towards the blocking, but I automatically respect your game as a receiver if you are willing to block, and he showed that ability. So he's going to help out in both the run and pass for our offense, and he is a big-time threat down the field. He's good after the catch. So is he a true number 1? I don't think so, but I think he could be a damn good wide receiver too for a very long time for the Patriots.
Yeah, John, I'm going to piggyback off of something you said. I don't like the pick because I just think that they needed to go bigger there. Elliot Wolf talked about this a couple months ago about the need to find size so that you can develop matchups on the backside away from trips. And so when you hear somebody say that, you automatically think, okay, they want a big X receiver, 6'1", 6'2", 6'3", maybe even 6'4", that can win jump ball situations, especially in the red zone. He's not going to do that for you. Now, I think he is terrific one-on-one. I mean, everybody, of course, saw the highlight of him beating Travis Hunter clean off the ball for a touchdown last season. He is terrific in those man-to-man situations on the backside, so he can play X, although I think in the NFL, where you're going to face bigger corners who are longer and can press and reroute, I think he's going to have a harder time getting the clean releases he got in college. I think he's a willing blocker, but I think he gets overwhelmed at times. I think if you want to get the most out of Kyle Williams, I think it's going to be playing to his strengths. Like I said, he averaged over 16 yards a catch on perimeter screens. That's going to be his strength. You got to get him the ball quick. You got to get him the ball in traffic off of mesh routes. You got to get him the ball on perimeter screens. And then when you're in the red zone, that's when you want to try to create those one-on-one situations with him, whether it be on the backside of trips, one-on-one on a fade ball, maybe a slot fade. That's where I think you can get the most out of him. What's hard for me is he's 5'10", 190. That's not an X receiver. Like you said, John, I think that's a Z. That's an F. He can play in the slot. He can play flanker. But I think what's going to be interesting to watch here is who does he beat out here? Now, all of a sudden, you have 10 receivers on that roster. They're not going to carry 10 receivers, obviously. They're probably going to carry half of that. So there's going to be a lot of odd men out here. I would not be surprised this weekend if they made a trade and maybe shipped off one or two guys tomorrow that are currently on the roster as receivers. I mean, Is it likely? No, but we see veterans get moved all the time during the NFL draft. You could potentially see them swing 1 or 2 receiver deals tomorrow to clear up some space for a guy like him. I will say this. I think when you look at his skill set, he will have an advantage over some of the guys that are on the roster right now. But if the Patriots think that he's going to play X receiver for them, very few guys at that size can play the X and play it effectively. Stephon Diggs is a guy who can play the X at that size and play it effectively. I'm not sure he's Stephon Diggs, but if he has a similar skill set, he might be able to do it.
And maybe that's a sneaky clue into their offensive vision that they're going to put Diggs at the X, and they hope Kyle Williams and maybe Kendrick Bourne early on will be the Z. I mean, that's a possibility as well. And it's funny you mentioned that because, like I said before, Tesla, who went right after, is 6'4", 215. Like, that's the X guy. So they clearly targeted this guy. And I think, again, same thing with Travion Henderson. The explosiveness is what stands out. I mean, they've tried to get explosive guys. They tried with Tyquan Thornton. They tried with Jalen Polk. Like, they tried to get some of these guys, and they've just largely failed to get these explosive playmakers. So we'll see, obviously, in the long run if Henderson and Williams end up being those guys. But it's clearly, I think, something, if you want to look at their strategic plan in this draft, like explosive. Even Will Campbell, again, offensive lineman, moves really well for an offensive lineman, a guy who's going to probably be a left tackle.
They're back to really weighing those relative athletic scores.
Yeah, and hopefully not as heavy as they weighed him in 2022, because I think they went overboard there and they had a bad draft. But I think that it does feel like that is a larger component maybe than at least, say, the last couple of years or so.
And it seems like there's so much overlay with Z receivers on our roster, I feel like. But when you're looking to cut down the roster at the position, you got to ask who has trade value. And there's not many. You're not going to get what you use to draft Baker or Polk in a trade. They didn't show enough last year, clearly. So I think they stick around and at least get a chance in the preseason before they cut ties with either of them. You're not going to get rid of Pop, I don't think, because he offers something that most of your receivers don't. And then you look maybe Bourne, maybe Booty. Those are two guys I think you can move, and there's overlay there. But other than that, I don't see a trade happening. Maybe, and you take what you can get. But I think they're going to let these guys battle it out in the preseason and see who the best 6 or maybe even 7 are and carry an extra one next year.
It's going to be interesting because, again, it's such a cluttered mess. There are parts of this roster, specifically the offensive line and wide receiver, that I really, truly, genuinely believe are a cluttered mess. There's a lot of bodies there. And I get it. You want to have a lot of bodies at certain positions because you want to create competition. You want to have true evaluations of players. But when you look at wide receiver, you can legitimately throw out 5 names as being the odd guys out. You could say Booty could potentially be one of the odd guys out. Douglas, Bourne, Baker, Polk. These guys could all have 1 foot out the door at this point. So I'm curious to see. You add Kyle Williams, he's going to give you an explosive element. Stephon Diggs is making the team. Matt Collins is making the team. So then where do you go from there? You'd have to think Jalen Polk makes the team. He's got to get another year. You got to think Kendrick Bourne makes the team. So then where do you go? What do you do with the rest of these guys? I don't think Pop Douglas is a lock. I really don't. I think he's kind of in the same boat as Baker and Polk. It could go either way. So obviously a lot of this will also depend on what Kyle Williams shows in camp. But make no mistake about it, they got a lot of bodies there, and they got a lot to work through. We'll see. Again, I like the player. I like a lot of things about Kyle Williams' game. Like I said, I love his releases. I love his ability to stack and separate over the top, especially against man coverage. Like I said, my biggest beef tonight was I wanted them to get someone in the mold of a Jaden Higgins, a big X receiver that can develop and generate matchups for him on the backside of trips and on the backside of certain formations. They didn't come away with that. I don't think it's going to be Kyle Williams. You are watching Patriots Pulse. I'm your host, John Sarianides. As always, I'm joined by my partner, John Lyons, and tonight we are once again joined by our Paul Varzella. With their third pick of the night. Patriots originally had the 77th pick of the third round. They traded down to the 85th pick with the Carolina Panthers. They then traded again. This time they traded down to the 95th pick. And with that pick, they took Georgia center guard Jared Wilson, who ran a 4.840 at the combine, 6'3", 310 pounds, really athletic, very impressive young man. We got to meet with him at the end of the night tonight before we left. We met with him via conference call. Very impressive young man, mature, smart, engaging. He's going to be fun to cover. Thoughts on that pick? They had yet another body to a cluttered position in offensive line.
Yeah, always feels good, John, when a 310-pound man can run a lot faster than I can, right? I mean,
Yeah.
really good
I
athlete.
used to run that fast back in my day.
I think you still do. But
I have never run that fast in my life, and I will never approach that speed.
That's okay. We'll pretend.
I have other strengths, though, John.
Of course. But when it comes to Jared Wilson, like, he only 1 year as a starter at Georgia, but he's a really good player. And this is something that really, ever since Ted Karras left in free agency to go to Cincinnati, they haven't had an adequate plan long-term at center or even at backup center. Obviously, David Andrews has missed some time, and we saw last year there was a lot. I mean, it was Ben Brown for a while, it was Cole Strange for a couple of games. Like, there was a lot of mixing and matching at center, and really, whenever David Andrews hasn't played, that's kind of been the way it's been ever since Ted Karras left. And it feels like Bradbury's your guy for this year, and you can like Brad. I mean, listen, word of caution on Bradbury. Vikings are very eager to just let him go. So I think there's potential there, but I don't think he's going to come in and be this great center. He could be maybe pretty good, but long term, if Jared Wilson takes a year to develop and he's your center for the next 7 or 8 years after that, you're in business, because I think what he showed in his 1 year at Georgia was he could be a really good center going forward. I just think he needs some more time and some more development. That's all. And I think he'll get it here, at least behind Bradbury, for this year.
He's definitely rough around the edges as a prospect, so he's going to need that year to sit, which is fine because we have options at center for this year. But down the line, I think he will be a good center. And Elliott Wolf also said tonight he's got guard flexibility as well. So
I think he's going to play guard eventually. With that speed, you want to get him out in space as much as possible. With that speed, athleticism, and lateral quickness.
And you wonder, too.
You want him playing in space.
Just a side note, Paul, before I go back to you. What if he ends up being one of their best 5 and they put him at left guard? If he's better than Layden Robinson or Cole Strange, like, I wouldn't bet on that, but I don't think that's impossible either.
Well, that position is wide open still this year. There's 3, maybe 4 guys that are going to try out there. So they're going to leave the door open for anyone. Whoever wants to throw some elbows and walk through the door, they'll let them do it. So if it is Wilson, and he has, again, I think he has that ability in his game to play guard. So if it is him, good. You just add more depth to your roster there. So there's options at least with him. And I think he will develop into the center of the future just because there's less options there long-term than there is at left guard. So we'll see how it plays out. But nonetheless, it is a good addition to the offensive line and a very raw prospect who he started playing football in high school, and he only had the 1 year of starting at Georgia. So plenty of room to grow there. And Doug Marrone has a guy that he can mold into whatever he wants him to be.
Yeah, again, like I said, there's going to be some interesting choices there, especially when it comes to the interior of the offensive line. There's going to be a lot of odd guys out. I will say this, the guys that Belichick drafted 2 years ago, I hate doing this to them, but there's a strong possibility that none of those guys will be on this roster come September. I mean, they've already moved on from Antonio Mafi. Sidiso and Jake Andrews are going to need to have a really strong camp to make this football team. Again, there's a lot of competition there. You mentioned Layden Robinson. You mentioned Cole Strange. You mentioned Ben Brown. There's a lot of bodies for only 3 spots, and you can only really carry at the most 7 offensive linemen or 8 going into a game week. You're not going to carry much more than maybe 10 or 11 on the roster, including your practice squad. So realistically speaking, I do think they're going to carry a lot of bodies along the offensive line early, but now you just add another guy that's another body in the mix. Now, you took him in the third round, so the expectation is he's going to make this football team and he's going to play well. But again, as I said earlier, when you look at this athleticism and that lateral quickness, fellas, I have a hard time believing he's going to play center for them. I think long term he could be a guard. And Paul, you brought this up, and I think it's a good point. I mean, maybe you put him in the mix there at left guard and see if he can compete with Robinson and Strange and anybody else you're going to try out there. Bradbury's probably only a 1-year solution. Brown's probably only going to be here a year. So maybe their plan is to play him at center. But Elliot Wolf did say tonight that they are going to give him a look at guard, that they're going to give him the opportunity to play there. And look, let's face it, we're living in a world now where that seventh offensive lineman, that sixth and seventh offensive lineman on any given game week needs to be able to play multiple positions. If he's your swing guy between guard and center, great. Then you find yourself a swing tackle. And once you have that swing tackle, now you either have two guys that are starting or two guys that are your sixth and seventh man. So I think it's an interesting pick, a guy that was highly touted in terms of the centers. He's one of the 3 best centers in this class. But a guy, as you mentioned, John, doesn't have a lot of experience either. So in many ways, he's still cutting his teeth. It's going to be interesting to see how he gets acclimated to the NFL and playing at a higher level.
Yeah, and I think obviously this is a longer term discussion and something for the summer. I lean towards them right now carrying 8 offensive linemen on the active roster because there's just so I know you mentioned because a lot of times it is 7, but I just think there's so much uncertainty inside because Moses is your right tackle, Campbell's going to be your left tackle, Onwenu's going to be your right guard. But you don't really have an answer at center and left guard definitively. We think it's going to be Bradbury at center, but we're not. That's not guaranteed to me. And left guard, we just went through 4 or 5 names that could conceivably be your left guard. So I think I could see them, and a lot of young guys too. I could see them carrying 8 offensive linemen, even if it means they skimp at another position and carry fewer safeties or just 2 quarterbacks or something of that nature. Because there's so much youth and uncertainty there. And also, I mean, some of these guys picked last year, like Caden Wallace and Layden Robinson. Like Caden Wallace dealt with some injuries, and both of them, I mean, were they really coached that well last year and developed that well? And not to call out those guys that were here, but I mean, how many guys on the Patriots got better last year developmentally? 2 or 3 guys, like Marte Mapu and the 2 young quarterbacks, and that's it. So that's why I think that might be something that McDaniels looks at and Vrabel looks at and says they want to give those guys maybe 1 more year than they otherwise would have.
Yeah, and I think, John, to play into your point, 2 easy guys to cut are Jake Andrews and City So. I've been out on So since he was a rookie. I never liked what I saw from him anyways, and there's options there over him now. And then Andrews can't stay healthy. So you already have 2 or 3 options at center if you want to include Strange in that mix that at least can – well, Strange not so much, but – Bradbury and Brown can at least stay on the field and stay healthy. So is it really worth carrying a 3rd center when you have players like Strange and Wilson who could have that flexibility of playing guard and center? I don't see Andrews as a useful piece to this roster anymore.
And I think one other note is which one of those guys can also back up Onwenu at right guard, right? Because we're talking all this thing about left guard. But, John, you hit the nail on the head. If you're going to be on that roster, like if Layden Robinson can only play left guard, but Wilson can play both or Strange can play both, that's a difference maker and vice versa. So, and I think Layden Robinson last year had time at both guard positions. That is valuable too. So I think that could be something we look at in training camp is kind of a separator, when we get down to roster cuts.
Yeah, and the other part of this is, what does this staff think of Cole Strange? Are they going to buy into him enough that they give him 1 more year here, or are they going to look at this and say, look, if this dude doesn't have a good enough camp, we don't owe him anything. We don't need to keep him on this roster. It'll be interesting to see. They didn't draft him, so they're not looking to save face if he ends up officially becoming a bust. I still think that there's a place for Cole Strange on this offensive line. You're talking about a guy that's 6'4", 307 pounds, athletic, long. He can probably play center for you. He can play either guard spot, really, but definitely left guard. They've got to do everything they can, in my opinion, to get this guy on the field and keep him healthy. Because if they do, we've seen flashes of it with Cole Strange. That's what's frustrating. If you get past the fact that he was a first-round pick in 2022, we have seen flashes from him when he has been healthy. So it'll be interesting to see if they give him that full opportunity to compete and or start at left guard. Gentlemen, I want to say thank you for taking the time. I know it's really late here. We're pushing 1 o'clock in the morning, but thus is life when you're covering the NFL draft. Great job, great stuff tonight, and we got another long, busy day tomorrow. The Patriots have a bunch of picks tomorrow, so they'll keep us busy for sure.
Yeah, it should be a big day tomorrow and a chance to really build the young depth on this roster.
Oh, yeah. That's when we'll start to see these developmental pieces come into play. So it's exciting. And defense, finally. So plenty of options still available. It'll be good to see who they end up choosing.
Yeah, tomorrow's all about drafting for depth, but also drafting for the future, because you have to start to look forward to certain guys whose contracts expire in 26, 27. You can draft ahead and potentially not only beef up your depth, but add guys that you can develop as replacement starters down the road. So it'll be interesting to see what the Patriots do tomorrow. Nonetheless, we'll have you covered from start to finish. So make sure you're following along both anyfootballjournal.com and all of our social media platforms. That'll do it for our Day 2 recap. For John Lyons and Paul Vonzella, I'm John Sarianides. We will be back with you tomorrow, and we will wrap all of this up at some point at the end of this weekend. Until then, thanks for tuning in and have a great night.